Welcome back to the zone. It's been so long since I've done a YouTube video and talk to you about my life in NUS, but I'm finally back. Yeah, I just ended my final exams last week, and basically for today's video, I want to share with all of you what I actually learned throughout this entire first year in NUS as a PPE student. So for those who are unaware, I currently study in the National University of Singapore, and I'm majoring in PPE, which stands for Philosophy, Politics and Economics. In NUS, right, we actually have a common curriculum for most year 1 students that we have to clear. So some modules that don't necessarily belong to our major that we need to study. So yeah, I'll probably do a separate video on the common curriculum modules that I've taken for this year. But for this video, I'll be sharing with you the modules I've taken under my major. Okay, so this is a brief overview of how the PPE curriculum works in NUS. So for the PPE curriculum in NUS, we will basically take some modules from the philosophy department, some modules from the political science department, and some modules from the economics department. And also, there are some modules that are specially catered and made and created for the PPE curriculum. So PPE modules, okay? So basically, yeah, these 4 categories like philosophy, political science, economics, and PPE modules. For this entire academic year, I've taken 2 modules under philosophy, 2 modules under economics, 1 module under political science, and 1 module under PPE. Alright, so without further ado, let's dive right in. Also, I created a Miro board to give everyone a nice visual representation of the modules I've taken. So I will be leaving the link for this Miro board in the description below, so do click it and check it out. So yeah, so this is my journey in NUS, and we will start with the modules I've taken under philosophy. So I've taken 2 modules from the philosophy department. So there is GX1015, Life, the Universe and Everything, as well as GX1014, which is Logic. Okay, let's go with the first one, Life, the Universe and Everything. So this module is actually the introductory module for philosophy. So it's kind of funny how they come up with this name, but I guess learning about philosophy is indeed learning about the life, the universe and everything. So yeah, this module name really explains philosophy in a nutshell. Yeah, okay. I really enjoyed this module. I took this module back in the first semester, back in August last year. So basically what we learned for this module is kind of like introductions to the different subfields in philosophy. So we mainly focused a lot on moral philosophy. We also did some on epistemology, metaphysics and other philosophical pursuits. Yeah. Okay, so let me give all of you a quick overview of what we learned, our syllabus overview. So yeah, we talked about moral philosophy. So moral philosophy, we learned about value theory, normative ethics, applied ethics, and political philosophy. So for moral philosophy, we started off with value theory. It's the very first lecture that we took in this module. So value theory essentially is about what is good and bad. What is instrumentally good and instrumentally bad. What's intrinsically good and intrinsically bad. So we came across this idea called hedonism, which is the idea that the pursuit of happiness is the intrinsic good in its own. Yeah, it's very debatable, but yeah, that's what we learned. And we move on to normative ethics. So value theory focuses on what is good and bad, but normative ethics focuses on what is right and wrong. Yeah, so we learned a lot of things such as like the golden rule, which is like, you do unto others what you hope others will do unto yourself, or something along those lines. Yeah, and there are like different variations of it, different ideas, different concepts relating to the idea of like what is right and what is wrong. Yeah. And also with this foundational knowledge we have about value theory and normative ethics, we can try to apply it to real world context. So applied ethics. So I remember this very interesting lecture, probably one of the most memorable ones from this module, which is about eating meat, factory produced meat, farm produced meat. So for this lecture, right, we actually kind of like try to understand whether if it's ethical for us to eat meat from animals that are mass produced in farms. So we talked about whether their lives are worth living, whether or not they actually do feel happiness, assuming that happiness is an intrinsic good. Do farming animals and slaughtering them afterwards for human consumption, is that really giving them happiness? We won't really know. I mean, they could probably live a pretty good and happy life in the farm all their lives, but they only have to endure that 1 minute of pain as they die when you slaughter them. So it's quite debatable. That's why it's applied ethics. We try to use these concepts we learn and apply it to the entire idea of like farm animals. Alright? So to build upon this idea of ethics, we apply it to political philosophy as well. So as we all know, political decisions are kind of like moral decisions, especially when it comes to certain topics that are quite contestable, such as abortion, right? Whether or not we should legalize abortion or should we ban abortion. Like this in itself is a very, it's based on ethics, it's based on like morality, whether or not you believe that it is morally right or morally wrong. So there's a lot of discussion relating to it. And for this particular module, we focused more on like the idea of like statism and whether anarchy, the idea of like, having political power in a sense is having the right to coercion. What gives politicians the right to coerce others, while we normal individuals don't really enjoy the same right to coerce other people. Yep. So it was a really interesting discussion, and I think it's quite relevant to PPE as well. We're learning about like politics and economics, how like these philosophical ideas can like kind of like enter the other disciplines. Multidisciplinary learning. Yeah, this is entirely what PPE is about. From moral philosophy, we moved on to metaphysics. So metaphysics I don't really know. I can't remember what the actual definition of metaphysics is, but based on my understanding, metaphysics is kind of like learning about like ourselves in a sense. So I remember this lecture on the philosophy of mind. We learned about consciousness. How do we know we are conscious? And like what makes us us? Yeah, like how do we know that we have our consciousness? And I remember this really interesting concept of the ship of Theseus. Yeah, I remember that was a very interesting analogy that my professor brought out. It's about like how like, you have this ship that you bring out every year for hundreds of years to exhibit. But you realize after hundreds of years, this ship starts to like disintegrate and fall apart. So essentially it's like when you see parts of the ship that is like broken off already, you just take them out and you replace them with new pieces. So you probably replace like 1 or 2 new pieces every year. And obviously a ship is made of like thousands of pieces, right? But eventually, after like many hundreds years later, you realize that the ship that you're exhibiting now consists of parts that no longer even belong to the original ship. So like what makes this ship the ship of Theseus? And imagine if you kept all the old parts and you restore the old parts, you make them together and form the ship again. Then is this the more legitimate, the more accurate ship of Theseus? Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm just like so mind blown by all this. Yep. So it's quite interesting philosophical debate. And also another topic that we learned is the philosophy of religion. So we kind of debate on, does God exist? And if God exists, what are some conditions that he exists? Or they exist, we don't know what gender God is. Yeah, so very interesting. I really enjoyed this lecture on religion as well. And the next one we learned about epistemology. Epistemology is kind of like the study of knowledge. How do we know that we know something? Like the study of knowledge in general. And I remember there are a few lectures relating to this. There is one lecture on paradoxes. So like, yeah, paradoxes, I mean, it's not really my thing, but like, the idea of paradoxes is quite interesting. It's about like how like, even though some of the premises of the argument, they might seem really like logically sound. It sounds like, it makes perfect sense. But I come to a conclusion that doesn't really make sense to us. So we try to understand how paradoxes occur and are there some ways we can circumvent it, and like, basically just the beauty of it all. Yeah, just very interesting. I can't remember whether this lecture is related to the one on paradoxes, but like we kind of learn about like mathematical reasoning in philosophy as well, which is really interesting. Like math is a kind of philosophical on its own. Yeah. Okay, so that is a brief overview of what I've learned in this module, and let's talk about admin methods. So how this module actually, how do I live through this module? Right. So this module, there are weekly lectures in person. And highly recommend that you attend the in-person lectures because the professor, his lectures are really interesting, and I really love attending like a live lecture because like you can see everyone is just like mind blown all the time. I really like that experience, and you get to discuss with your friends after lecture what you have learned. You can discuss, and I believe a very huge part of learning, like philosophy, involves like group discussions. When you get to talk to your friends about different ideas, I think that's when we really grow as philosophers. We really learn how to see things from different perspectives. And obviously, everybody has very different opinions on the same philosophical issue. And yeah, there are weekly tutorials as well. Tutorials are really, really chill. We just like recap what we learned in lecture, we debate about it, and we talk about it. Yeah. Honestly, the assessments for this module, I really love them. It's like 40% on quizzes. And these quizzes, right, the questions will always be out the minute the lecture ends, and you get to discuss with your friends. Yeah. So basically, they allow collaboration, and it's weekly quizzes. And each quiz is like 4% of your grade. So kind of scary because like each question you do weighs really heavily in your grades. But the good thing about it is you get to discuss with your friends and you get to have collaboration. And I think that's really fun. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And yeah, attendance is 10%. Obviously, just attend, just show up for tutorials, you get the marks. Participation, yeah, you just have to discuss with your friends, talk, just speak up in class, yeah, you get participation marks. Final exam, 40%. This is a open book exam, 2 hours. MRQs, so MRQs are basically multiple response questions. And yeah, it's open book, and I think it's pretty chill. Okay, honestly, for me, when I first took this module, I was wondering, how can you evaluate someone's understanding of philosophy through multiple choice, multiple response questions? Like, I feel like for me, like studying philosophy feels more like an essay writing kind of like course. So yeah, I was a bit like, oh, how will they test it? But it's interesting because like there are multiple response questions. They will ask things like, oh, which argument best represents this? Or like, which of the following best describes this? Which model best describes this? Or whatever. So in a sense, there is a right answer to it. Yeah, so I kind of like how they scope down the question for us. And I believe that this module is a really good introductory module for philosophy. And even for those who are not planning to major or minor in philosophy, you can take this as the unrestricted elective module. It's really fun. I do know a lot of friends who are not in philosophy, they just take this for fun. And I think they do pretty well, and they enjoy themselves too. Yeah. Okay, moving on to the next module on philosophy. Alright, it's on logic. So I took logic this semester, starting January this year. And okay, so logic, right? How logic works actually is, yeah, we basically learn more on classical logic, and basically, as I mentioned a bit earlier, right, about how philosophical arguments, they will come with like premises and conclusions. So for classical logic, what we do, we actually analyze the validity of like these premises and conclusion, and whether or not they give us a valid conclusion, and we actually apply these techniques to philosophical arguments as well. So actually, the entire idea of classical logic, right, is that we actually convert arguments into symbols that's easy for us to visualize, and from these symbols we can kind of derive and we can make inferences to determine whether or not the conclusion is valid or invalid. Yeah, and it sounds pretty easy, right? But it's actually not. It's like there's a lot of details, a lot of learning to be done for this module. So here's a quick overview of the syllabus. So for the introduction, we learned about the difference between validity and soundness. So there are two different things. I don't think I do a good job explaining this, but like, an argument can be valid, but it doesn't have to be sound. There are some arguments that seem like they should make sense, but in reality they don't make sense. Yeah, so that's where you can see there's a difference between validity and soundness. And we also learned about the introduction to like logic symbols. So we learned about things like, oh, this is an apple, this is a pear. You can represent it as A, P. Like this cannot be an apple and a pear. Yeah, or like this fruit is an apple and a pear. Like, oh my god, it's like this. If this fruit is an apple, it cannot be a pear. So you know, there are like different ways that you can represent these arguments in symbols. Yeah, basically there are a lot of jargon to it that even till now I have like a hard time even like verbalizing it. So let's not go there. Moving on, there's like propositional logic and quantificational logic. I will explain to you the differences between them later on. But yeah, okay, so to start off propositional logic, obviously one of the most important skills we have in this module is translation. How do we translate real-world arguments into logic symbols? It is actually quite difficult, especially in real-life context, right? A lot of the arguments we say don't really make sense, or we kind of like verbalize it in a very convoluted way. So finding ways to translate it and make it easy for us to analyze is a skill on its own. Yeah. And there are a few skills involved in understanding the validity of arguments in propositional logic. So we can think about truth tables. We can chart out a table, like 1 being true, 0 being false, and we just come up with like permutations and combinations of truth values. Yeah. So we can do a truth table test. We come up with truth tables, we look at the table, and we can determine whether or not the argument is valid or not. Alright, okay, so we also learned about the truth assignment test. So the truth assignment test is kind of like a shorthand way of trying to find out the validity of arguments. Yep. After that, we learned about inference rules. So essentially, like from truth tables, we can kind of like derive some rules that are like universal, I guess, to logic. So we learned about like the if rule, the if rule, the or rule, the s rules, I rules. Yeah, a lot of rules that we need to learn. And after that, we learned about proofs and refutations. So one very important part in our learning of logic is trying to prove using formal methods of proof to prove that the arguments are valid. So yeah, it is quite difficult sometimes. I don't know, I think maybe for me, like I'm not really someone that can work well with symbols. But if you work well with symbols, I guess it'll be quite a breeze for you. Yeah. It's actually quite fun actually. I feel like every time we get to prove or disprove an argument, I always feel like wow, like a very huge sense of satisfaction. It's just like doing math and you solve like a huge problem sum, you're like, oh wow, okay, yeah, feels amazing. Yeah. Okay, quantificational logic, yeah, we also learned about translation, proof and refutation. So the difference between propositional logic and quantificational logic, right, is that as the name suggests, quantificational logic, we try to quantify things. So the difference between propositional and quantificational is that for quantificational logic, we see things about like, oh, for all x, for some x, for, yeah, something along those lines. Then there's also ways that propositional logic and quantificational logic can come together. They always overlap. Like our exam questions are basically just overlapping quantificational and propositional logic. I feel like for me, right, the most interesting part of this module is when we get to apply it to real life philosophical arguments. So some of the tutorial questions that we did, right? I remember this one very memorable. It's like we applied like classical logic into a mathematical argument, which is insane because like I never knew like you can actually apply logic to math. Yeah. So basically this argument on like whether or not something about I can't really remember what is it, but like for those who know math, it's something about along the lines of like the sum of odd numbers or the sum of prime numbers, I think. Like, can there be a definite, like, is the sum of prime numbers infinity? I can't remember what was the argument, but it was quite complicated, but we managed to simplify them into logic symbols, and we kind of proved that it actually works. So yeah, that's quite fun. Yeah, it's like we, even though we don't know anything about math, personally for me at least, but like you get to convert it into logic symbols, and we can prove it based on our knowledge of logic. Pretty fun. Yep, admin matters. Okay, so yeah, the lectures for this module are all online. It's pre-recorded, so it's not live lectures. Like literally everything is up there. Every week just click in, watch the lectures. Yep. Tutorials are bi-weekly, and each tutorial is 2 hours long. We get to basically go through tutorial questions, and we have in-class assignments as well. And my tutor for this module is also the professor as well. So yeah. Okay, so here are the assessments. So these assessments, right, there is this computerized test, 20%, which is done on the software created by the professor himself. So there was a trial run that is 2% and 18% for the test itself. I have some reservations about this, and I'll tell you more about it later. Okay, we have this like homework component as well, which is 15% of our grade. So what this does is basically we do online practices, we have to submit a record of us finishing the practices. And yeah, the moment you finish it, you get 15% straight away. But these practices are horrible because every time you make a mistake, they will deduct marks, and you have to get full marks for each practice before you can count it as completed. So really painful, but I think these exercises really help me solidify my understanding of logic. So yeah, good and bad. Midterm exam is 20%. It's a take-home exam, so we can discuss with our friends and everything. Multiple response questions. I think most people did pretty well for this because you get to discuss with your friends. Yeah. We still have a final exam that I just did last week. Oh my goodness. Final exam, 45% of your grade, 2 hours, open book, multiple response questions. Similar format to the midterm exam, but it's more like holistic to test the entire module. Yeah. Okay, so now time for my personal opinions on this module. Personally, I wouldn't say I really enjoy myself in logic. I mean, certainly there are moments where I have fun, like moments of enlightenment where I get to solve logic problems. But honestly, I wouldn't say I have the best experience in this module, especially the computerized test, because it is on a software done by the professor himself, and this software is really working against me. I feel like for me, I'm not really tech savvy. There are so many technical steps. I have to download so many things on my desktop just so that this software can run. And even the way it is designed, I wouldn't say it's the most user-friendly. Like the interface isn't the most user-friendly, and I'm just very confused by the entire system of it. So yeah, I lost a lot of marks on this computerized test because I wasn't familiarized with the format. I don't want to throw shade at the professor or whatever, because honestly speaking, for a philosophy professor to come up with a software from scratch, he literally coded and created this everything. He programmed this entire software himself. So mad respect to him for that. But honestly, I believe more can be done for this software. But yeah, I mean, it is a compulsory module for philosophy students. I'm just grateful that this module is over, and I did learn a lot from this module nonetheless. So yeah, alright. But let's move on to political science. Alright, moving on to political science. So far I only took one module under the political science department, and it is PS1101E, which is Introduction to Politics. Yeah, I took this module this semester. What is this module about? It is the Introduction to Political Science, and I really like how my professor arranged this module. So basically, the entire theme is on power. Because essentially, political science is the study of power, about how governments use power, how is power allocated, how is power distributed. Yeah, so essentially that is like the entire foundation of political science. Yeah, so let's look at the overview of the syllabus. So my professor did a really good job in arranging it. So there's power as sovereignty, power as process, power as legitimacy, and yeah, everything over there. So yeah, let me just briefly share with all of you what I've learned in this module. So we started off with the idea of sovereignty, the idea of the state. So yeah, a lot of people are kind of confused between the state and government. It's kind of different. Honestly, I can't remember what's the difference, but yeah. So basically, the idea of sovereignty is about having absolute authority over a particular territory, you know, having certain basically within this area, this boundary, you have absolute authority. That's essentially what sovereignty means, to me at least, based on my understanding. And from there, we try to understand how states, they want to acquire power, they want to acquire authority, and this authority has to be legitimate as well. We also learn about the importance of international recognition of your sovereignty. That plays a very important part in the entire study of political science. Yeah. We also learned about power as process, about the policy cycle, how are policies being made. So we learned about the three branches of the government, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, and how they work hand in hand together. How are policies being implemented, you know, how they're being drafted. We learn things about agenda setting. It is a very important part of politics, because like what is on the agenda and what is not on the agenda in itself is very important, you know. A lot of people kind of like neglect that point. How is this agenda being discussed in Parliament? How do the people debate about it? How do people go about it? How do the public respond to it? Yeah, there's so many there's so many phases in this design of policies, and we're learning about the policy cycle, a brief overview of how it works. Yeah, then after that, power as legitimacy, we learn about democracy, the idea of popular authority, in the sense of how power shouldn't lie in a group of elites, but it should be distributed to the people. And we realize that there are some problems with it, because you know there's like the tyranny of the masses. There are definitely problems with democracy. We have voters who are like, problematic. So yeah, that's an entire topic on its own. We also learned about power as collective action, civil society. So civil society is kind of like the third sector of society. There's the government, the citizens, and civil society. So civil society kind of like made up of voluntary groups, non-government groups, NGOs, and how they try to keep governments in check. Yep. And they kind of like work in the interest of the people, and how they can work with the government, work with the people, and part of the society. Okay. After that, we learn about power as information. We learn about the role of media in politics. This is very important because we realize that, especially now that media, social media is like getting more and more prevalent. Like you can see like a media proliferation rates across the world is getting higher and higher. We see how they can interfere with elections, how they can interfere with the idea of populism as well, how people use social media, how politicians use social media to gain influence, and how people can use, how the media can utilize this mass communication platform to keep governments in check. You know, like the media acting as the political watchdog. Ideas like this. We also learn things about power as military might. We kind of like an introduction to international relations, about why the countries go to war, the different theories, the different accounts of how war might happen, why should we go for war, why should we avoid war. Yep, really interesting topic. And also power as economic might. We learned about the idea of free trade and development. So like similar to war as well, like trade, you know, there are things like trade wars, like tariffs and barriers to trade and everything. We also learned about why is trade good, why is trade bad, why is trade beneficial, should we always advocate for free trade, why is there a rise in protectionistic measures. Yeah, these are interesting topics to learn more about. And as far as the idea of development, economic development, like, you know, we learn about GDP per capita as a possible way to measure economic development, but it might not be the most accurate, and there are always things like income inequality. Yeah, it's like just because they give countries money, give countries foreign aid, doesn't mean that they will develop in a pace that we are expected to develop because of like certain structural problems involved with it. So yeah, this is what we kind of learned for this chapter. And also, one of my favorite parts of this module is power as privilege. So basically, privilege are like identities and benefits that you get purely based on groups that you're in. It's like not really, it's like kind of like assigned from birth. It's like, for example, for me, I'm born in the majority race in Singapore. That kind of gave me a privilege that I didn't ask for. I mean, like, I'm born into this. I got this privilege solely because of my race. Yeah, and there are also things, there are also other things. So just because you have privilege for your race doesn't mean you're always privileged in all other aspects of life as well. So yeah, it's very interesting. And we learned the idea about intersectionality, the idea where we have a lot of identities, and these identities might be conflicting. Some identities might give us privilege over others, but some identities might put us at a disadvantage compared to others. Really interesting, this idea of like how we are complex, humans are all complex beings, yeah. And also the idea of ethnic identities, about race, about the difference between race and ethnicity. They're like, is there a biological basis for like racial superiority? Yeah, we'll talk about this as well. The idea of gender identities, about how the concept of gender has evolved over time. The idea of feminism, fighting for women's rights, and yeah, gender expressions, and yeah, a lot of things like this. So this is essentially what we learned in politics, and I think it kind of gave us a good overview of the different subfields involved in the political science department. So we did learn about comparative politics, international relations, political theory, as well as governments and public policy. Yeah, some admin matters in relation to this module. So lectures are online. There are no physical lectures for this module. It's weekly and it's also recorded. Tutorials are bi-weekly. They last for 2 hours. And in tutorials, we kind of just discuss more about what we learned in lecture. We recap what went on in lecture. Okay, so for the tutorials for this module, we kind of do a lot of like group discussions, a lot of like group-based activities. We discuss what we learned in lecture, get together in groups and discuss about it, and that is where we get our class participation as well. Yep. Okay, so for assessment, participation is 20%, pretty heavy. So yeah, you gotta speak up for this module in class. Quizzes are 10%. There are only 2 quizzes this semester, so each quiz is 5%, and it's like halfway through the semester. Yeah. So 2 quizzes online, multiple choice or multiple response questions. I can't really remember, but yeah, you can discuss with your friends also. So that's a good thing about it. And next, we have the essay preparation assignment. So basically, okay, there's the essay preparation assignment that's 10%, and the research essay that's 30%. So this essay prep assignment is kind of like a research proposal. That's 10%. You submit a proposal. Yeah, I think it's about 500 words. It's a really short proposal. You submit it to your teaching assistant. They will mark it. They will give you comments on how you can work on your research essay. For our research essay, we have 3 set questions given by the professor. We choose 1 question out of these 3 questions, and we write a 1.5k word essay. Yeah, on any particular topic. So I remember the topic I wrote about is the role of media in keeping governments accountable. Yeah, that's the topic I wrote about. Really interesting topic. I mean, yeah, I just realized that holding governments accountable, what could that mean? It's quite a big topic, and I am so glad I get to do some proper research, get to read up about it, and write an essay about it. Yeah, it was really fun. Okay, and our final exam, which is, I literally took this final exam probably 3 or 4 days ago. Yeah, the final exam for political science, 2 hours, it's a closed book exam. Oh my god, that's really scary. Closed book. So we have to really memorize the stuff. It's a pen and paper exam as well. You have to actually write down. It's not MCQ or whatever. You don't use a computer, pen and paper. So there are short answer questions and you have to write an essay. So short answer questions, our professor basically just gave us some concepts. We just have to give a very brief explanation, brief linking. I don't know. Yeah, just a very brief short answer questions literally. And then there will be 2 essay questions. You pick 1 essay question and you write about it. The essay questions are quite interesting. They kind of focus more on topics of the latter half of the semester. So I remember the question I wrote about is related to identity politics. Really interesting, about the idea of gender identities, ethnic identities, like whether or not it is beneficial for us to use identity politics. I hope I did well enough for this exam. So yeah, that concludes our segment on political science. Now let's move on to economics. Okay, so economics, I took 2 modules from the economics department. I took EC1101E, which is the Introduction to Economic Analysis, as well as EC2104, which is Quantitative Methods for Economic Analysis. So let's start with EC1101E first. So it is the introductory module to economics. So yeah, compulsory module for all of us. Let's go through the syllabus overview. Okay, so for economics, I'm sure most of us kind of know that there is microeconomics and macroeconomics. So microeconomics kind of focuses more on firms. We learn about markets. We learn about market failure. Yeah, basically it's more of a smaller scale economics. So macroeconomics kind of learns about the economy as a whole. We learn about countries. We learn about different economies, exchange rates, interest rates, and things like this. Yeah. Okay, so let's dive in. So firstly, introduction, we learn the idea of scarcity. The reason why economics even started out is about scarcity. There's limited resources but unlimited ones, and therefore we're learning about the distribution of resources, how the free market tries to distribute resources, how governments try to distribute resources, and this distribution of resources have impacts on the economy as a whole. We also learn about the production possibilities frontier and gains from trade. So yeah, that's just some very fundamental tools of analysis for us. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about microeconomics. So microeconomics, we learn about how markets work. So yeah, the idea of demand and supply, elasticities of demand, elasticities of supply. Yeah, they're very, very important fundamental tools for us to understand how markets work. We learn more about welfare economics, the idea of consumer surplus, producer surplus from demand and supply, and also possibilities of deadweight losses. Yep, that'll be under market failure. And also we did learn about government intervention, how sometimes governments want to increase or decrease the optimal equilibrium output or equilibrium price. So governments can interfere with it. How they can do it? They can do through policies like price ceilings, price floors, subsidies, taxations, and things like this. Yeah. So the idea, okay, moving on, we have the idea of market failure. So market failure, we learn about externalities, about how sometimes when we model the free market, we all kind of like neglect the unintended third-party effects that we don't really consider in our models. Those are externalities. We learn about public goods. Public goods are goods that are non-virus and non-excludable. So sometimes you realize that, oh, public goods are like, no firms are incentivized to produce these goods, and everyone can free ride on these goods. So consumers don't really have to pay for it. So that the market for these public goods might be missing totally. So this is where markets might fail. Yeah, so that is a topic we learn about. Yeah, we also learn about producer theory, and we learn this about market structure, about firms and their operations, and about profits, revenues, costs, and things like this. Yeah, so for those who, for Singapore, if you take JC, A-level, economics, kind of similar to what we learned, but there are some new concepts involved as well. We learned about things like tragedy of the commons. That's something new. Yeah, I can't really remember. I took this like a few months ago already. But basically, there are some new ways for us to analyze microeconomic problems. Yeah, really interesting. So don't take it lightly. Just because you think you took JC econs doesn't mean you know everything about economics. And the main difference between economics in JC and in university is that in JC it's kind of like a humanities subject, like you write essays about it. But for university, right, it's kind of like a science, more like a social science. So there's like math involved. Definitely there's math involved. You have to analyze things. You have to like look at it. Yeah. So we do like problem sets. We look at real world problems. We try to see, oh, how can we model it to economic analysis and like analyze it. Yeah. Okay. Next is macroeconomics. Okay, for this macroeconomics, right, for this module is honestly quite different from the macroeconomics that we learned in JC. Yeah, this is where we should put in more focus on if you are taking this module. Yeah, so macroeconomics do focus a lot on it. We started off with measurements. Measurements in terms of how can we measure the developments or the performance of countries in terms of the economy. So we learn about GDP, like inflation rates. We learn about unemployment rates. So this will be under like production, price levels, employment in countries. And yeah, quite interesting. Like apparently I didn't know there are many different types of employments. There's like the U1, U2, U5, U6 kind of like unemployment system for us to analyze like what groups of people might be in the workforce, who are interested to be in the workforce, who wants to be in the workforce but couldn't find a job, who is not part of the workforce entirely on its own. So it's quite complicated, yeah. And yeah, we learn about long run macroeconomics and short run macroeconomics. So we learn about the classical model and then the long run classical model, which is kind of more like what we learn in JC. And afterwards, we focus more on the short run model, also known as the Keynesian model. It's a completely new model that we didn't learn in JC. So the Keynesian model is kind of like a Keynesian cross. It's like a 45-degree line and a cross. Yep. So from this cross, we can learn about the multiplier effect. It makes a lot of sense. When we look at this cross, we understand why there is a multiplier effect. And we learn about fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is kind of like a way to solve short-run macroeconomic problems through shifts in the Keynesian model. So moving on, we learn about money and banking. Money in itself, money is a very important part of economics. And as we all learn, money is just an indication of value. In itself, it doesn't worth a lot, I guess, but it is because we believe that money gives us value. That gives money the value. Yep. And we learn about how money can be created in banks. So how banks work, how financial institution works. And we learn a bit of, and we do a bit of like balance sheets, which is like, I don't know why we're doing it, but okay, we can do some of it. So we learn about assets and liabilities and how, what constitutes assets, what constitutes liabilities. We learn about the equity of, banks and everything. Very interesting. And okay, we also learn about monetary policy. So this is where the money market comes in and how governments can manipulate the money market for their own economic agenda. And also we learn about exchange rates. So there's the currency markets. So we always learn about it, like things like the US dollar against the renminbi, for example. So we learn about currency markets and how governments can intervene with currency markets. There's like the fixed currency rates. And it's learn about how governments can intervene in these currency markets. Some of them keep their currency rates artificially high for purposes. Yeah. So yeah, this is basically an overview of EC 1101E, and it's honestly very content heavy. Yeah, because I feel like the study of economics is quite rigorous on its own. There are a lot of concepts, a lot of subfields, a lot of things that we can learn for economics. So it's very thorough. The professors for this module, they are very, very rigorous, with our understanding of the content. So even to now, there are a lot of things that I still don't understand, and it's been a few months since I touched these topics. So kind of rusty, but yeah, I try my best to make a summary for you guys. I hope if I say anything wrongly, feel free to comment down below. Just point out my mistakes. Alright, so let's move on to the admin matters for this module. So the lectures are weekly and in person. They're also recorded. Yeah, for me, I actually do like to attend the lectures for this module face to face because I feel like you can see everyone just having like mental breakdowns together. I feel like that motivates me. It makes me feel like, oh, I'm not alone in this struggle. And yeah, we basically have lecture activities as well, like poll everywhere. We basically do polls, lecture activities. Yeah, actually I think the lectures are pretty enjoyable, but they are very content heavy, very fast paced, and my brain hurts every time after each lecture. But it hurts in the best way possible. Like I really learn a lot from it. Yeah, there are weekly tutorials. There's 1 hour long. We basically go through our problem sets that we are given in tutorials. And there's always not enough time because, as always, the study of economics is very rigorous, and there's a lot of rigor in the questions that they give us. So, quite a challenge, yeah. Okay, so these are the assessments for this module. So quizzes are 10%. These quizzes are weekly. They're online. They're MRQs, and you get 3 attempts, so you can kind of discuss with your friends. Yeah. And problem sets, you basically have to submit some questions on the problem set and submit some responses every week as a group. So you usually get into groups of 3 or 4, 2 or 3, can't remember. Yeah, but I have a group of 3, and I'm so grateful for them. Like my 2 group mates are like the best group mates I can ever ask for. Like we always discuss our work together. So we have to basically write out our responses to the problem sets and submit them every week, and the submission itself contributes 5%. Yeah. We also have tutorial participation, which is 10%. Yeah, you just actively participate in class, you just voice out and just answer questions in class, 10%. Midterm exam is 25%. It's a 1-hour paper with multiple response questions. Definitely not enough time for you to finish the paper. So you have to be very strategic with how you approach this paper. Final exam is 50%, 2 hours, and multiple response questions as well. Similar format to the midterm exams. And I think after taking the midterm exams, you kind of know what to expect. So the final exam wasn't that bad, wasn't a shocker. Like, I can manage my time pretty well for my final exams. Yeah. And I would say EC 1101 is probably one of the hardest modules I've taken so far, just because of the sheer amount of content and the rigor of it all. Yeah, it's just, you have to be prepared to suffer for this module. Okay, so moving on, the next module I'll talk about is EC 2104, Quantitative Methods for Economic Analysis. I took this module this semester. I also just finished the final exams for it a few days ago. Yeah, so what it is, right, it's basically just very hardcore math. It's basically the math that you need for higher level economics. So as I mentioned earlier on, the study of economics can be quite mathematical because we do model economic problems and we need to have math involved. So we do graphs, we do functions, we do a lot of things like this. So let's go through the overview of the syllabus. So it's just a lot of math. It will be an advantage if you take A-level H2 math. But if you are not confident with your math, there is this math bridging module they can take before you take this module. And also, if you take certain modules from the math department, you don't need to take this module, but I guess if you're an economics student, you have to take this module. So here's a brief overview of what we learned in this module. We started off with single variable calculus, which is kind of like what we learned in JC, but more information to it. So we learned about functions and limits, we learned about single variable differentiation, so kind of like what we know as differentiation. And single variable optimization, so learn about minimum points, maximum points, local maxima, global maxima, things like this. And then we learn about first derivative test, second derivative test. So it's kind of like a recap of JC content, but a bit more involved. And there is integration as well. And also we have multivariable calculus. So this is where we have x and y variables or z variables in our mathematical equations and how we differentiate them, multivariable differentiation. Comparative statics, we learn about level curves, and we learn about, basically how like in economics, right, there are some problems that have like 3 dimensions. So now our graphs are 3D, like entire diagram in 3D. It's really cool. For example, we look at production of an economy. We can think about capital, production, land, and labor. There are basically a few variables involved, and therefore we need to understand like multivariable calculus as a foundation for us to higher level economics. Next, we learned about linear algebra. So this is basically matrices, and I never knew matrices can be so complicated, but it is quite complicated. We learned about determinants, inverse matrices. We also learned about the Gaussian elimination. So we can use Gaussian elimination, right, to actually solve simultaneous equations and systems of equations through matrices. Which is actually quite mind-blowing because it actually works. And I was like, oh, it works. So obviously with economics, right, with so many variables and equations that will come with it, it is definitely important for us to know how to solve a system of equations through matrices. And the more you learn, you realize that there are actually some shortcuts that you can do using matrices to solve systems of equations. So things like Cramer's rule, using the inverse method, using inverse matrices to get answers for our systems of equations. Quite fun. Honestly, I enjoy it a lot as I learn about matrices, but it's just difficult. And next, we ended off this module with multivariable optimization. So I mean, the study of economics is about optimizing distribution of resources, I suppose. So we started off with unconstrained optimization, constrained optimization with equality constraints, and constrained optimizations with inequality constraints. It's very complicated. So basically we learned about the Lagrangian. We also learned about what are the different constraints that are involved and how we can try to solve them. And it's pretty fun, and honestly, like eventually when we get to do our group project, we actually get to formulate a real-world economic problem and try to solve it as an optimization problem. Yeah. Alright, now moving on to the admin matters. So for this module, the lectures are weekly. Yeah, they're in person, they're also recorded, and they're weekly tutorials as well, an hour long. And basically, we will go through selected questions from our problem sets. Yeah, basically, it's like a math class, basically. Yeah. Okay, so for the assessments, we have participation is 10%. So how the participation marks are being graded, right? We actually just present answers in class, and I think you have to present a few times in class, and you get the 10%. Yeah. Your answers don't have to be correct, but I think like if the tutors can see that you put in the effort to try to present your answers, then I think that's good enough, 10%. We also have quizzes that form 10% of our grade. These quizzes are like quite sporadic, they appear out of nowhere throughout the semester. It's online, there are MCQs, and it's only 1 or 10, so it's really scary. And it's quite difficult, yeah, the questions are quite difficult. Okay, so we also have a group project which is 10%, and as I mentioned earlier, we have to come up with our own optimization problem and try to solve it and present to it in class. We have our midterm exam which is 30%, it's 2 hours, pen and paper, open book short answer questions. It's basically like a math exam, and you just have to write your workings out, and it's open book, but it's not completely open book. You get to bring in a cheat sheet and refer to the cheat sheet, so you have to write down all the formulas that you want to write down in the cheat sheet, refer to it in your exam, and solve problems. Final exam is the same, just that it covers content from the entire module. Yeah. Alright, so now let's move on to the PPE segment, okay? So I took one module, the Introduction to Philosophy, Politics and Economics, PE 2101P. I really enjoyed this module. The professor is fantastic. I really love his lectures a lot. Yeah. So basically, what exactly is PPE? I think many people are like confused with what PPE is. Everyone thinks that, oh, you're just studying politics and philosophy and economics, which is yes, but it's more than just that. So I think I phrased it pretty well here, so let me talk to you. It's about learning about political and economic tools backed by philosophical analysis to help us examine multi-dimensional issues. Because as we all know, issues in society are always multi-dimensional, multifaceted. Usually we cannot just analyze and approach it from one point of view. We have to like look at it from different points of view. And PPE is actually equipped us with different tools from economics and politics and philosophy for us to look at these problems. And this module is kind of like quite heavy on philosophy. Like I would say like the way they approach it is a very philosophical way of approaching problems. But we also use political and economic tools for us to analyze issues. And the philosophy analysis comes in when we want to like understand the arguments being proposed by these political philosophers and economists. Yeah. So here comes the syllabus overview. This module, right, like the content is very heavy and it's very high level. Yeah. I mean maybe because I'm a year 1 student and there are quite a lot of year 2 students who take this module as well. But I think as the introduction module, it is quite heavy. Yeah. So essentially this module, right, we kind of learn about the basics of PPE, and then after that we look at case studies. So yeah, the basics and case studies. For the basics, we first try to model rational agents. We started off by learning what is rationality. So we focus on instrumental rationality, the idea of connecting our means to our ends. Yeah, that is one way we can define rationality to be. And after that, we try to learn a lot. We learn more about like how we humans, or we term as agents, how can we be rational? So we learn about Bayesian learning, which is like based on Bayes' theorem. So essentially is the idea that for individuals to be rational, we have to undergo Bayesian learning to look at the probabilities of the choices we make in our decisions and look at which decision that maximizes our utility but gives us the best ends from our means. Okay, so we also learn about utility. We learn about preferences, about how some people might prefer some things over the other, like ordinal rankings, but we realize that sometimes it is impossible to rank what makes us happy. Yeah, you know. Okay, so we also learned about the theory of games, game theory. We learned about prisoner's dilemma. We learned about why all of us, we kind of know what is the optimal outcome, but somehow every time when we interact with people, we always land out in the suboptimal outcome. So that is the prisoner's dilemma. We learned about the morality constraint. Perhaps people might be driven by guilt, people might be driven by other moral reasons that might shift the equilibrium in situations of the prisoner's dilemma. We also learned about coordination games because prisoners dilemma is more like one-to-one. But coordination games is when you get to communicate with people, when you get to discuss with people. And sometimes people might be incentivized to cheat in coordination games and how this might change the payoff matrix. Yeah, it's quite complicated. We learned about like the stag hunt, an example of coordination games. So for example, you go hunting with your friends. So you want to hunt a stag or a hare. I don't really know what stag is. I suppose it's a big animal. A hare is like a rabbit. So obviously for stag, a huge animal, you need to coordinate with everyone. You strategize, oh, how do you want to like set up a trap? How do you want to approach it? How do we want to like tackle this stag together? So it requires coordination. But at the same time, you also can hunt for hares, like hunt for rabbits. So like maybe like you're going with your friends to hunt. You can say, oh, I see a rabbit, you can just get it, capture it yourself. But if you capture rabbits, you're kind of like delaying the progress of setting up this stag hunt. So yeah, something along those lines. It is quite complicated. Yeah. Moving on, we learned about conventions, norms, and institutions. In our learning of game theory and the prisoner's dilemma, it's kind of like restricted to like a small group of people. As we all know, political decisions are like huge coordination games. So they coordinate with millions of people in the population. So because of this, we should learn about conventions. Like conventions could be a solution to coordination games. Like we might coordinate our behavior with strangers that we don't know purely because of conventions. Yeah. So if you see like people queue up for something, obviously you will queue up as well. Like unless you have reasons to not queue and just cut the queue, for example. So like queuing, for example, is a convention. Yeah. So I also think about social norms, expectations, and cooperation. Yeah, so for social norms, right, I can't remember what the terminology was it, but I think it was descriptive norms and injunctive norms. So basically there are some norms where like you look at people, so you see what other people are doing, you kind of like follow suit. Injunctive norms are kind of like based on what you expect people to do, and you kind of like adjust your behavior to fit in this social norm based on what you think what you expect people might do. Yeah, so quite interesting, this idea of social norms. We also learn about utility, welfare, and maximization. So we learn about like the distribution in society. We looked at things like income inequality. We look at how resources should be distributed. For example, how government payouts, subsidies should be given across different communities in society. So we looked at Hassani's argument, where Hassani he proposed the idea of maximizing average utility in comparison to John Rawls. He's very famous. He's a very famous person in this PPE realm. So he has a book called Theory of Justice, and his theory kind of like opposes Hassani's argument. He proposed the idea of maximin, where like in a social situation where you don't know where your social order is, you don't know what your social status is, it is best that you go for maximin, where you maximize the worst outcome possible. In comparison to Hassani's argument, where you maximize average utility. So there's a difference, right? Maximizing the average versus optimizing the worst outcome in society. Which is better, which is worse? It is a debate. Yeah. Obviously, the arguments are much more nuanced than this. This is just like a very brief summary of it. Case studies. Okay, the case studies are really interesting. So the first case study I learned is about nudging. So far we kind of treat Asians as rational, but obviously there are times that people are not rational, and we try to see how nudging can be involved. Trying to understand whether or not humans can be irrational at times. The rationality objection about whether or not nudging people involves us treating them as irrational. And essentially what nudging is, right, is that it changes the choice architecture. So basically, when we make decisions, we have a lot of choices involved. Nudging is a way to like kind of like steer people to choose choices that give them a more desirable outcome. It makes them more rational because it connects them from their means to their ends better. So this is essentially what nudging is. And we also looked at things like the marketplace of rationalizations. This is based off the idea that knowledge is social, right? I mean, like everything that we learn, we kind of learn from others. And people learn from us too. And we actually get things from belief-based utility. When you look at news, when you look at social media, when you look at things that give you knowledge, you do feel some sense of satisfaction, some sense of happiness. And obviously, producers know that we have belief-based utility, they tap on that and they create markets out of it. And that's why you can see fake news on the rise, because we see news that are being sensationalized. They kind of cater to certain groups of people, and yeah, news agencies can gain from it. So obviously, there is a marketplace for these sort of rationalizations. Next, we also learn about effective altruism. It's about doing the most good. What does it mean to do the most good? and we treat effective altruism as a pursuit in life, as a project. Yeah. So for us to do effective altruism, it is important for us to learn about market harms and benefits. How can we shape our consumption habits that will give the most good to society, to the world in general? And we also learn the idea of lumpy goods. So we learn about things like how, for example, you want to enact social change, you want to start a revolution. But obviously, the first few people to start a revolution will be a very, very great disadvantage. There's a huge overhead cost they need to clear, they need to overcome. So this idea of lumpy goods is initially it's very stagnant, but once you reach an outcome, you reach a really huge outcome, a change that is really, really big. Yeah. And the last topic that we talked about in this module is the idea of democracy. We look at how democracy might fail. So we look at voters who are immoral, irrational, ignorant, and impaired. Yeah, so these are many cases how voting might fail, right? How people might not vote for the best outcomes possible. And we also learn more about this idea of epistocracy, which is giving committed voters more votes. A very interesting idea. It's a way for us to combat democracy and try to overcome the problems of irrational voters. But it might not work as well. So yeah, we basically have a huge debate on it. And yeah, as you can tell, right, the content for this module is really, really quite deep. Yeah. Okay, so admin matters. The lectures are weekly, in person, and recorded. And tutorials are bi-weekly. So each tutorial, we kind of discuss the concepts we learned in lecture, and we have good discussions as well. And let me tell you, right, for this semester, this is the only module where I actually attended every single lecture in person. Because right, the professor, he makes in-person lectures very enjoyable, and we do get to play some games in physical lectures as well. I remember he do give us cards, he do play some card games to demonstrate coordination games, game theory and everything. Yeah, and I really like his lectures. I really appreciate it a lot. But his lectures are very fast-paced and very content-heavy. So yeah, you better rest well before you attend these lectures. Okay, so here are the assessments. There's participation, which is 10%. So you participate through forum posts. So you just post forum posts. Yeah. You write a summary of what you learned. You can come up with your own post and let people discuss about certain topics in the module that wasn't covered in depth. And also we have a group assignment, which is 20%. And I really love how flexible it is. We get to choose any topic that you want to talk about, and you can present it in a creative way. Yeah, you can do more than just academic paper. You can choose to do a podcast. You can choose to do a video presentation. So my group, right, we did a podcast. We analyzed nudging in the Southeast Asian context. Really interesting. And we looked at actual real-life case studies of nudging. So things about how organ donation. Right, in Singapore, organ donation is a default choice unless you opt out. And we also look at things like food labeling, Nutri-Grade, they label healthier choice or low in sugar. How they use this to incentivize and motivate us to adopt a less sugar diet. I guess it's better for our health in general to fight for diabetes nationwide. Yep. So yeah, basically this group project we get to talk about anything we wanted, and we chose to talk about this topic. Okay, so there's a survey. There's 5%. It's really nothing much. It's just our professor wants to learn more about us, so we submit surveys. 5%, yeah. And there's a very interesting assignment called the wild argument reconstruction. So this, I guess, is very academic. It's more like something you would do in philosophy. So we basically have to create a critique, an evaluation of an academic paper that we chose. So there are some academic papers that the professor has given to us, and we basically choose a paper that we're interested in, and we write a critique about it, and it's about 1K words, yeah. So the paper I chose, right, is about social norms. I had so much fun reading the paper. And obviously coming out critiques is very difficult because they are well-known professors, in the philosophy realm, in academia. And I try to critique the arguments. It's difficult, but I had a lot of fun trying to analyze and dissect the arguments in the academic paper. And our final essay, we can write a topic on anything. Yeah, and since our group assignment, right, we talk about nudging. For me, in my final essay, I kind of analyze a bit more about nudging, how nudging might fail, yeah, and how we can combat it, and how governments can try to overcome these shortfalls in nudging policies, and yeah, hopefully obtain the most desirable outcome for everyone in society. Yeah, it's a 2K to 2.5K word essay. It's probably the longest essay I've ever written in NUS so far. But I had a lot of fun researching and trying to dissect and analyze and come up with cool concepts and ideas. Yeah. Alright, so that concludes my journey at NUS so far. I hope all of you enjoyed this video today. Yeah, so this is a brief summary of what I've learned throughout my first year in NUS. Yeah, and yeah, I'm putting a lot of effort trying to make this my robot and trying to come up with a summary of this. I literally spent hours over the past few days trying to draft out this my robot and try to come up with this video. So yeah, do subscribe to this channel to support me. Yeah, I will really appreciate that. And yeah, I will leave a link to this my robot in the description below, so do click it and check it out if you want to relook it again. And yeah, any questions or any queries you have about PPE or anything about the concepts or content I covered today, do comment down below. I would be very glad to reply and help you out. And yeah, and for those experts, my fellow PPE friends, if you're watching this, if you realize there's some parts that I might not explain clear enough or there's some explanations that are wrong, please comment down below and just let me know so all of us can learn together. Yeah. Okay, so that's all for today. Thanks everyone for staying for this really long video. And yeah, if you enjoyed today's video, do remember to like, share, and subscribe, and see you on the next video. Bye!